Kevin Magnussen has earned himself the dubious honour of becoming the first F1 driver to be banned from a race since Romain Grosjean in 2012. 12 years since we last saw an F1 driver benched for poor on-track behaviour. But does Magnussen really deserve to sit out the next race? And is the system that's put him on the sidelines fair, or something that makes Formula One look a bit ridiculous? I've got Ed and Scott with me to discuss the fallout. Guys, let's start with the incident that made this a thing in the first place. Magnussen had a pretty innocuous collision with Pierre Gasly in Monza's second chicane, copped a 10-second penalty for it, got a couple of penalty points added to his licence, and now he misses a race. So fair cop or ridiculous overreaction?
Yeah, well, clearly it would be absurd to ban a Formula One driver for a fairly innocuous incident with Pierre Gasly, but that's not what he's been banned for. He's been banned for an accumulation of super licence penalty points. So you get to 12, you get a ban. It's a little bit like a speeding a ban on the road. You don't get banned for speeding once, it happens multiple times. So yes, if you look at it purely as that, one incident, then it does look odd, but there's got to be something that tips you over the line. That's what the system is. You get to 12 across the course of 1 year and you get an automatic ban. And the whole point of this system is to have a formalised structure in place so that repeat offenders can have something hanging over them and in extreme cases get banned. It's the first time it's happened in the 11 seasons. This has been active since being introduced in 2014, but that's why it's happened. It's the accumulation, a pattern of behaviour rather than one individual incident, as it was for the last ban when Romain Grosjean was put on the sidelines for a race in 2012.
When you see drivers get punished in race for various infractions, whether it's causing a collision as Magnussen did at Monza, running another driver off the road, going off track and gaining an advantage, all of these things come within session penalties, in race penalties, or penalties for the next race. But if you look at the stewards' documents, whenever they're explained or when they're made official, they also come with these licence penalty points. And the way it's basically evolved over time is that each incident basically comes with a prescribed number of penalty points. And I think we've seen one or two examples where stewards have applied a bit of discretion. Sometimes they've given more. Very rarely, I think maybe once I've seen them not give penalty points compared to the past. But by and large, it's effectively a set menu. And I hate it. Not because Magnussen's been banned. I think that's a whole other matter which we'll get into. But I hate the double jeopardy element of this system. I find it baffling that you can get a penalty in race and you get this license penalty thing as well, where it tots up over time. I don't mind the two things in principle, but I think they should exist separately. I think you should have the option, the stewards should have the option of working out where to draw the line. Do you penalise a driver in race because it's actually fairly innocuous, or have they done something so egregious that they deserve to have points on their licence? So that, as Ed explained, if you top that up, you get 12 points over a 12-month period, you do deserve to sit on the sidelines. We've seen far too many times drivers have accumulated a lot of points through fairly minor offences. And I would like it so that if you did what Magnussen did at Monza, for example, and you just clattered into someone clumsily, you get a penalty in race, maybe you get 1 point on your licence or something like that, something really minor. But then you compare what he's done in the past, for example, almost deliberately driving people off the track in the desperate pursuit of helping his teammate, unsporting behaviour. I think, 3 points on your licence for something like that.
Yeah, it's a fair point about the minor incidents. I kind of see it as a bit like the yellow card system in football. You know, it's fair enough to have a totting up system to encourage discipline, and you should be banned when you reach the threshold. But you can argue the toss over whether those individual yellow cards or incidents are actually worth the penalty that was given. And I think in Magnussen's case, most of his penalty points, probably 8 of them, are deserved for being a bit ridiculous, but you could argue 4 of them, that China incident with Tsunoda where he had an innocuous bump from a snap of oversteer, and then the Gasly incident at Monza, they're just kind of racing incidents almost. He should be penalised if it's too clumsy with the time penalty, but to kind of double punish him with the points, I think ridiculously pushes him over the threshold. So in my opinion, he shouldn't be banned. That ban is ridiculous, but the system, even though it's not perfect, I kind of agree broadly with the system. Another person who's kind of sympathetic to Magnussen's position, Pierre Gasly, the guy he hit in Monza. Gasly was almost shocked to learn that Magnussen was facing a ban after this incident and pledged to do whatever he could to get it overturned, which I'm not sure what power he wields in the FIA, but I guess we'll find out in due course. Obviously, Gasly has his own particular relationship with this penalty point system. He's come perilously close to a ban himself in the past. So how do his and Magnussen's situations equate? Are they comparable?
I don't think they are, because Gasly is one of those drivers I mentioned before, kind of tots up a load of points through a bunch of pretty minor offences. I don't really remember Gasly doing a single egregious thing when he got fairly close to his race ban. And that actually, I remember that triggering quite a conversation at the time about how silly the system was, and how you were having drivers that were getting quite close for no reason. Whereas Magnussen has done a couple of things that I think have deserved punchy license points related penalties. And we should point out that he has accrued 12 points this season. So he's managed to get this racked up really quickly in 5 or 6 months of racing, which is, no mean feat. Congratulations, Kev. You've done a good job there. But when you break them down, as I think you mentioned before, Ben, they're not all of this nature. So if we go back to what I was saying before, if you find that kind of difference between applying an in-race penalty and then where you draw the line at actual license penalty points, I'd say Magnussen probably has 6 to 8 penalty points on his license for like legitimate over-the-line offences that deserve more than just a slap on the wrist, which frankly, when you're in a midfield car and you're often not scoring points, a 5 or 10 second penalty as they are this year, they don't really sort of penalise you very much. And then what you'd have in this situation is, I reckon most of the drivers on the grid probably wouldn't have any license penalty points at all. Some might have a couple, but Magnussen will be halfway to a ban anyway. And bear in mind, we're only halfway through a season. That seems about right when you think he's crossed the line a few times this year. So I don't think they're the same. I don't think Magnussen is... I can't have complete sympathy for him, but I do think there is kind of like a middle ground to be struck here between the Gaslys of this world and the Magnussens. There has to be something a bit more reasonable, surely, that we can come up with.
He was also on notice, wasn't he? He knew he was on 10 points. So regardless of whether you think it's right or wrong or fair, you know that you're one incident away from a ban. So you have to dial in a little bit more caution, shall we say, into overtaking moves. The problem is there's the push for consistency, isn't there? So that's why you have a set tariff for offences. Causing a collision is 2 penalty points. And they have those tariffs so that it's consistent. And then they have racing rules, so it's consistent. And that incident with Gasly, I think the thing that probably did for Magnussen was the fact that he had that big lock-up. The move was okay, but it wasn't well executed. Once he locked up, he then hit him. So you end up with everyone boxed into a corner. The stewards have all these measures and rules and frameworks and guidelines for how they should apply the rules to achieve consistency. And then they do it, and everyone says, well, that's not very consistent. And remember, most F1 drivers, consistency to them means if I do it, it's not a penalty. If someone else does it, it is. Okay, in this case, Gasly genuinely didn't seem to have much of a problem with Magnussen. He wasn't angry over the radio, but I don't think the drivers necessarily help themselves with their constant demands for consistency in this matter. And that's why, while you can debate the rights and wrongs of this structure, that is the structure that is in place. Magnussen knew he was racing under it.
The strangest thing about that, though, is that we have the methods by which the stewards determine the outcome of an incident is massive. They're massively wide-ranging. The factors that go into it are enormous. The stewards are trained to not treat every incident the same. So in the pursuit of consistency, we're looking for consistent decision-making processes, not outcomes, because the incidents, are different. So then, again, coming back to the point, Ed mentioned it again there, the set menu of licence penalty points. Why do you not then have flexibility to punish incidents differently? I get fed up when I see stewards' reports that say, and this is in line with previous incidents of this matter. Every now and again you see, and we feel that this deserves something more severe, and stuff like that. So why is that discretion not applied almost more liberally? Because it does feel like it's vanishingly rare. I really don't think I need more than one hand to count the number of times they've gone away from the set menu.
It's the sad push to regulate by numbers, isn't it? It almost feels like F1 by AI, when you actually need some proper considered interpretation of what's going on so you can apply the right thing to the right scenario. Actually, it's just an attempt to go paint by numbers. Here's a blanket decision we can just apply in every circumstance and then be done with it. But anyway, it's bound to be a massive talking point when we get to the paddock in Baku. And there's 2 questions really, Ed. One is, For the Haas team, what are the next steps for a team in a situation where your driver's been forced to sit out? How do they go about replacing Magnussen? And do we think there's going to be a big wave of sympathy for him among the rest of the F1 grid? Do you think the FIA is going to come under pressure to readjust how it applies these rules and regulations to on-track etiquette?
Well, the replacement's pretty simple. They can put anybody in the car, and they've got 2 reserve drivers, Oliver Bearman and Pietro Fittipaldi. Pietro Fittipaldi's racing in IndyCar, and Oliver Bearman's their driver next year. So that's the logical move, to put Oliver Bearman in. He's driven the car in, I think, 4 FP1s already. Obviously, there's F2 clashes, but that doesn't matter. He's already missed F2 once this season to race with Ferrari in Jeddah, so he's got no championship aspirations there. So that's a logical, elegant solution there, and it gets him a bit ahead for next year. But yeah, the discussions and the fallout and the politicking will be the more interesting points. I do think there is scope for a big philosophical change in terms of the way things are done in terms of stewarding. Picking up on what Scott said, I personally would prefer significantly more leeway for interpretation from the stewards. And a lot of the stewards would like that as well, because motor racing is very dynamic. It's not like you can have a line call in some things. Is the football over the goal line? Is the ball on the line or over the line in tennis? Is it LBW in cricket? These are all geometrical problems that have at least some fixed points. But other than the track edge, when you've got incidents in races, you've got 2 moving vehicles or more that are all interacting. So it's very, very complicated. You've got to factor in intent, balancing up that risk reward, etc., and whether people are making sensible decisions. A ban for accumulated infringements should reflect a pattern of behaviour that implies misjudgment and constantly overstepping the mark, not just an accumulation of minor incidents. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that actually Magnussen hasn't overstepped on a number of occasions, because he has, and he would be on a decent number of points. But I think there's an argument for going that way. However, Formula One has been going completely the opposite direction, more rigid. So I expect everyone's going to demand consistency. Everyone's going to complain. They'll have more meetings about it. They'll probably create a load more guidelines that box the stewards in even more. Then we'll get the stewards giving out penalties next time, according to what they have to do based on what they're told. And then everyone will say, well, this isn't very consistent. And so it goes on and on and on. And everybody's forgotten that sometimes you've got to allow there to be racing incidents. And that's important for me. You've got to allow the principle that mistakes will be made. If they're honest mistakes as one-offs, fine, you can let them go. If you make a series of honest mistakes in a short period of time, that's a problem. And that's, I think, the nuance I'd like to see happening. But that nuance is only possible if all the participants, and that's the team bosses who talk about it, the drivers, actually take a mature attitude to it, because it's just too easy to bleat consistency. Great thing to aspire to, but it's actually undermining the whole thing. System fundamentally good, very, very poorly applied.
I think there's going to be a reasonable amount of discussion about how bad it looks for Formula One to ban a driver, to sideline one, considering this hasn't had to happen in a dozen years. It's not really something everyone's used to, whereas in the other sports where there are, card offences, warnings, suspensions, that kind of thing, it is kind of part and parcel of it, which it's very rare in our world. So I'm curious to see how some people react to that. I think in terms of sympathy for Magnussen, it might depend on what whether you've raced him in the past and kind of how badly it's gone when you've raced him. I can think of 1 or 2 drivers that I think aren't going to have much sympathy. Fernando Alonso is not much of a fan of Magnussen, is he? Things like that, I can imagine there'll be some partisan responses. I'm sure. In a roundabout way, though, for Haas, good opportunity. Another race weekend for Ollie Bearman to get under his belt. A good chance for him to race with the team for the first time, having done that Ferrari outing early in the year. Tough challenge stepping into Baku to do it, and massive pressure on his shoulders, because other than the 2 McLaren drivers, he's the only driver with a 100% point scoring record this year in the races he's competed in. So he's going to have to keep that going in Baku as well.